So from New Delhi to Wilmore to Houston to teach at Fuller for a while, and you've taught at Asbury. You've been back and done a number of things in India. But you and I met right here in the foyer of Northland Church in Longwood, Florida. You were visiting with a friend who was someone from Asbury, I
That's
believe.
right.
Yeah, and we met.
Bill Tillman.
Bill, yeah,
Yes.
he introduced us, and I have to tell you that within 5 minutes of talking to you in the foyer, I felt that God was doing something unique, in I didn't know what it was, but as you began to tell me a little bit of what you had been studying and what you wrote your dissertation on, I felt like there was something unique for us. And then just to let people know what happened next, and then I want to come back and you'd love to hear your take on this. But we talked about getting together again, and we didn't for a bit, and then I providentially was headed to Wilmore in December of last year, and got a text from you as my plane landed in Lexington, and responded, and you and I met in a coffee shop the next morning and began to talk about what God has revealed to you in your own life and calling. And so I'm interested in hearing you unpack a little bit this whole concept of the estuary. And you wrote your dissertation about this, and folks can learn more about this at an online blog that we'll put up. But tell us about how that journey came and what it led you to.
No, thank you, Vernon. Yes, so in the period during which I was serving the church up in New York, was waiting on the Lord, in a season of waiting upon the Lord, and the Lord one day revealed to me the whole passage from Ezekiel chapter 47, verses 1 and following, where the Spirit of God, takes Ezekiel and shows him the river that's flowing from the temple of God, and then the river flows down into the sea. And where the river meets the sea, there the sea waters, so to speak, are healed or transformed. And that imagery and that metaphor of the river flowing into the sea, that place of the meeting, that mixing of fresh water and seawater and salt water, is what we refer to as estuaries. And that was really impressed upon my heart in a way that led me to further research and study on estuaries. And it just turns out that estuaries, geographically speaking, are some of the most biodiverse environments for the flourishing of different and varying kind of organisms.
So tell us again, what actually is an estuary?
Yeah, an estuary refers to the meeting place of a river and the ocean or sea. Yeah, okay. Geographically speaking, it's the landmass. So estuary cultures basically refer to the whole phenomena of the meeting of the fresh water with the salt water and the seawater. And that meeting place in the Bible is described as one that is healing and transformative. And it's, in geographically speaking, through millennia, estuaries have been places for people to settle down because they've been such biodiverse environments, metaphorically and spiritually speaking, so the church is not something we that flows inward, but that flows outward. It's the river of God flowing to meet the people where they are at, and being the transformative presence of the gospel where they're at. And that whole meeting and mix is a place for diversity and so, I fleshed this out some more in my dissertation, where I outline a theology for creativity, but essentially, no diversity, no creativity. So the diversity of the world is a place for the creativity of God. And so in summary, you can even say creativity inspiring diversity for community in Christ.
That's well said. But it sounds like you're suggesting that the church should be filled with all kinds of different people. Shouldn't we just all be the same, within the church?
Yeah. If you look at it, I was part of that, pattern. I think that's something that we fall into, and but as we read, the whole idea for even, and I think that's part of the correlation and how you and I related and what we were about between the estuary cultures and the church distributed. We're inherently saying, it's the church that needs to be the river. Rather than, in the past, the pattern was where I channeled in the seawater and set up expensive desalination plants and said, here's bottled water for $1, living water. But it's actually the other way around. We go meet with people where they're at. We in the past we spoke of building bridges, but like Ezekiel, I think the Spirit of God, Vernon, is calling you and I to get into the water. And like Ezekiel, it's first ankle deep, then knee deep, and hip deep until we can go no further. And I think the time is now and has come. The whole what we talk about the church distributor. I am, us for them there. I would also say always. That's the way it must be. Yeah.
Well, it's such a rich metaphor. You're right, for what we believe God's called us to do, and I think it was that moment talking to you over coffee that day where I realized, I thought God, kind of shook me like, pay attention here, and I didn't know if he was telling me to pay attention to you just to encourage you, or pay attention from a standpoint of the distributed church. But what I did know is that, we have been since we've been talking about the distributed church, we have tried to think of ways that we could raise up worshipers within the church, wherever it is, whether it's a personal church, a distributed church, a house church, a small group. And we've tried different things, and it was something about what you said that day that I thought, I think this man can help us. And I think God was telling me, I think this man I'm sending him to help you. And so I'm curious, but now here's kind of the big reveal. I'd love for you to talk about what that might look like in the distributed church.